And we are up. This
good.
is episode number 17 of the Our Town podcast. Never really thought I'd get out of 10, and then you get past 10, and here we are knocking on the door of 20.
Wow.
And today is it's a privilege. It's an honor. 2 weeks ago, I was at the Armed Forces Luncheon in the North Hall of the Von Braun Center. General Daly, the general of the Army Material Command, was the keynote speaker. And at one point in the program, he asked Paulette Risher, retired Major General in the U.S. Army, to stand up and be recognized as the CEO of Still Serving Veterans. And I was there representing Mantech. 50% of our employees are veterans. And our CEO will also tell you that does not include those that were in other elements of government service, intelligence community, federal civilian agencies. So the number is actually much higher of those that we employ, formerly, serving the government and the military in some way. Paulette Risher, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Good. So were you nervous at all when General Daly asked you to stand up?
Frankly, I was surprised we weren't on the agenda. And he had just seen me come in, and one of his staff did, and he recognized us, and we were really honored because, it's that's such a powerful organization, and there's so many people, the distinguished people there. So to be singled out felt good. It was nice.
And do you have any sort of relationship with General Daly? Have you worked with him in any capacity?
We have not. We tend, as Still Serving Veterans, we support our military, and of course he's very active in the community, being one of the senior military officers. So he had heard our names and was familiar with our work. And we've done a lot of things to support Redstone and, frankly, the whole community. Mm-hmm. And he was aware of that. So
it was good. I was interviewing, I think it was Clay Henchman the following day. No, it was the same day. And he was giving a speech up in Montesano for WAAY. They were the television station of the year. So he wasn't able to be at the luncheon, but we were talking about that, how it's just great to be around other Americans in a patriotic setting, celebrating our armed forces, which provide our freedom. And we just had Independence Day. Today is July the 13th. July 13th today.
It is.
So we just had 4th of July, and here we are. We were just talking about how fast time moves right before we came on the air. But it's a thrill to have you.
I appreciate it.
So you were born in Colorado.
Born in Colorado.
Which city?
Denver.
Okay. West, east, what part of Denver?
That's a good question. I left there when I was so young.
Okay.
But my parents had settled there and met there after the war. My dad was a World War II veteran. And we lived in Denver for 9 years. And he had always loved the Southwest. And so we moved to Scottsdale, Arizona.
Did you?
And so people who know that today, that's a very upscale, very nice community. When we moved there, it was rural and agricultural. And a lot of the main streets that are thoroughfares today were literally dirt. And so we kind of watched that area grow up.
So what took him? Was it your father's employment that took him to Scottsdale?
Well, Dad continued to work for the United States Army as a civilian after the war. And then at some juncture, he decided he wanted to go to work for the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
Oh.
And he worked in a reservation called Sackatone, which was a Pima Indian reservation between Phoenix and Tucson. Just dirt poor. When he first started, there was really just a four-way stop in the road, just poverty, just everything bad about living on a reservation. But Dad went there, and he was a logistician and a whiz at it. And he had in his heart that he could make a difference. And he did. He figured out how to get equipment from things like the Army and other agencies. They would think this is used up equipment, but for this Indian Bureau that had no police cars, no fire engines, no ambulances, this was real equipment. And so he built a little network of people that would call him and say, "Hey, Joe, we've got this. If you think you guys could use it." And so he always felt that was his contribution to people he really cared about. And it was part of that work ethic that he and my mother both had, that work was value, and it had value independent of the money it brought in. We were lower middle class family. We had our needs and some of our wants, but they always liked their work and would come home and talk about it and brag about it and share their stories. And that is something that both my brother and I have that deeply entrenched in us. It was never talked about, but it was modeled all the time.
So at that point, how long had the Bureau of Indian Affairs been around?
I don't know. It was a long time, obviously. And this was kind of an oddball. We could have lived on the reservation, but he was one of his core values was the value of education. And so Scottsdale had, at that time, the best school district in the state. And so he drove every day long distances so that my brother and I could go to the best school in the state. And that paid off because I was the first member of either one of my families to ever gone to college. We're very much, family that just kind of made that leap from kind of lower middle class to middle class. And my brother and I both graduated from Arizona State.
And my wife, Wendy, is in the studio, and I perked up at the Bureau of Indian Affairs because her aunt has just recently retired from the Bureau. Well,
wow.
Actually, recently, 4 or 5 years. And so that was her whole career.
Yeah.
She lived in Washington, D.C. That's how I met Wendy, was through the fact that she was living with her aunt after high school. I was living with my sister and brother-in-law and met her at church. And
wow.
And there you go.
Small world.
So a special place in our heart for the Bureau of Indian Affairs.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about growing up, though, in Arizona, in Scottsdale. Other than the schooling was great.
Schooling was really good. And it's a very different environment for the one we live here in Huntsville. We didn't have the racial diversity that we have here because, Huntsville is such an integrated community. And I go back to Scottsdale, even now, and I kind of, it kind of tip your head. It's like going to California or to other parts of the world where you're not used to the mix of people. But Scottsdale was a really good place to live, and good, strong communities and good services. The school was good. Arizona State, we didn't have money for me to go away to school, so I lived at home and worked while I was in college, but got a decent education out of it. Okay. And so, for me, it was a really good experience.
So I know that one thing that we're going to talk about later in your profession, and that you spent, as a psychologist, right, or in the field of psychology, but talk to me a little bit about the subjects that you enjoyed, whether at any age, in your kind of growing up years, middle school, high school, and then when did this interest in psychology kind of enter your mind?
I started out in college, I was going to be a doctor, and I'm a pretty good student. And so that was going to be, I had no clue what that meant, just did not.
Yeah.
So about the time I was into my sophomore year, I realized that I really liked the psychology work. And I changed from zoology to psychology. And I've always been interested in physiology of psychology, more the human side of it, as an undergraduate anyway, and today as well. But brain work, I'm very interested in animals and animal behavior. Just a pretty general interest in psychology at the time. In later life, in midlife, I went back and got my first master's degree is in psychology with a focus on organizations, because I'm not going to be a clinician, but I like working with organizations and with individuals.
Okay.
And that to me is something that I enjoy doing. I'm good at it. It just kind of fits my skill set.
Awesome. So never math. You wanted to be a doctor, but did you shy away from anything? Was there anything like, I hate physics, I hate biology, I hate
physics. Yeah, physics and math is not my strong suit. I'm good at any kind of science or anything that's got words associated with it and not numbers. Statistics are not my strong suit. I can get by, but not get by well enough that becomes my verbal language and that I'm comfortable doing that. Okay. So that was very much, but other than that, a very general interest in anything academic. And my dad reinforced that. because Dad was self-educated essentially. But when I would bring home an armful of books from college, within the first month, he would have read all my textbooks that had words in them. Now, he wasn't going to read the math or the physics and that kind of thing, but psychology, sociology, anthropology, anything that was readable, he'd have read all those books.
Really?
And he really, and I remember one time he said something that was kind of life, one of those casual remarks that becomes life-changing.
Mm-hmm.
I was whining about something and about a project I was working on, and he looked at me and he says, "You're smart, you'll figure it out." And it was something about the way he said that. It was it was a statement of fact and of confidence.
Yeah.
And that's always stayed with me. So when I'm faced with something I don't know what to do, I research it and go and look and I read and I figure out how to do it. And that's a lifelong characteristic, but he was very influential in that.
Now, what about your mother?
Now, my mom she worked retail. Mm-hmm. She was a working mother when that wasn't the norm. And there were people who were critical of that. But we needed the money, but she also needed the social context.
Okay.
Very social, very sweet. The lesson I learned from my mother was that she was, mother always paid attention to the people in the environment. The waitress, the cashier, mm-hmm. everybody. And this is, again, part of that idea that work, it has an ethic of its own and a value of its own, independent of the income. So mother would... she would talk to people, and I will tell you the story about when she was older. My father had passed away, and she was living with us, and she was really past the point she should have been driving. So she would go to the mall every day, and that was her thing. She'd dress up and put her little high heels on and her makeup on and her jewelry, and she'd go to the mall. Well, she'd lose her car. She just couldn't remember where she parked it, but she had been so kind to everybody in the mall. Yeah. The security guard would go and find her car for her.
Yeah.
Miss McDermott, here's your car. And they would take it. And then about half the time she would have locked her keys in it.
Oh, no.
I can't tell you how many times I've watched the guy from the locksmith come, greet her. "Hi, Miss McDermott, how are you? Jimmy the lock," and to hand her keys and have a great day. No charge, nothing. But it was a reflection of how much value she put in the human beings that were in her life. And that's another value that both my brother and I carry very strongly. Work matters. People's contribution to our lives matter. And always pay attention to that.
That probably started with her calling them by name.
Certainly.
No matter who it was.
By name. And she would also tell them, she'd say, "Oh, you're so pretty, you have beautiful eyes, and I love your hair." And people tend to ignore. Mm-hmm. She did not. It was important for her to see and to recognize and to honor their humanity and recognize their service.
I don't remember where I learned of this, but I would take it as fact. But the story goes, there's a university professor, and the kids have all been, in the class the whole semester. And I don't know, let's say it's accounting, right? And their final exam is coming up. And I think it was in the evening. And it was in the evening such that the nightly janitor would have kind of a regular routine where that they were kind of coming in the classroom or leaving, coming or going, and people, they would have had an opportunity to associate with this janitor. Mm-hmm. And so the final exam comes, and the first question, and maybe it's not accounting, this wouldn't fit, it doesn't matter. But the first question was, it wasn't about assets or liabilities, or balance sheets. It was, what's the janitor's name?
I love that story.
And really trying to teach a lesson, right, of kind of other things that matter in life. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a similar story where the professor had set up all of these incidents where kids are going over, through campus to get to class. They pass someone with the flat tire on the bike. Then they pass, someone that maybe fell down. And the people who passed the exam are the ones who actually stopped to try to help, even though they were en route to take an exam.
Let me tell you a parallel story to that one. It's a current research study about our intentionality. They took a group of seminary students who had just studied the Good Samaritan.
Okay.
And so they came into class, and the first group that came in and says, "Oh, you guys are in the wrong place. You're late. you need to go over across campus. They're waiting for you, and they're going to be upset that you're late. And they go charging out of the building. And one of the Confederates from the research team had fallen and was like they were ill. None of those students stopped to see and to aid, even though they'd just heard the Good Samaritan, and and these are good people. The other group that came in said, you guys are late, but don't worry about it. Everybody's waiting for you, and you'll be fine. They send them across campus, the same Confederate, and they all stop. And, it's about, we get so tied up in our own brain and our own mind and what we're doing that we forget. We forget the humanity piece of it. And it's easy. I mean, I'm a businesswoman. I know that you can just ignore the people, but that's not what we're supposed to do.
Yeah. So you end up at Arizona State. Later, let me ask this. Is the seed planted that you're going to go into the military?
That's a good question. So I'm 22. One of my commitments in my life was to be self-sustaining.
Okay.
I want to be an adult in the adult world. I want insurance. I want a salary. I want respect, or something like that. And my dad was very supportive of my desire to join the military. And I will tell you that was not common in that era.
Sure.
I've known a lot of women who said, well, I wanted to join, but my dad would forbid it, that kind of thing. My dad was all about the military. So it was an opportunity for me to, and I guess two other things. One is there were no role models for that, which is kind of weird. See, there were no women in ROTC. There were no women in the service academies. The Women's Army Corps was a separate branch of the Army. They weren't even integrated into the Army. And so it was there just wasn't a lot of role models for that behavior. One of the groups, though, that were very supportive of me were the returning Vietnam veterans that were there as students. Because I was an off-campus student, I was working a lot. I didn't really fit into the kind of the campus life.
Right.
But these guys, put their arm around me, and I became one of theirs. They didn't understand how I was going to be a lieutenant, in a few months. But they helped me provide tribe, while in college and during this transition point. So for me, joining the Army was a logical outgrowth. I had a degree in psychology, which isn't very marketable, and I was kind of life fell out that way.
So now let's step through your career.
Oh.
And so you graduate, and it's funny because I was thinking about this today as well, where we do so much on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, but then when somebody has to go and say, tell me about the last 20 years, there's so much. But yet sometimes you can just summarize it in a sentence or two, which doesn't really give it any sort of justice, right, to what you did or didn't accomplish in 20 years. But step us through, if you were to pull up Paulette Risher's LinkedIn page, I think it does a pretty good job of walking it through. But you were an officer in the military, also a civilian later on, and a consultant and a contractor.
Right. So 9 years of active duty.
Okay.
And had my husband and I were married. Ed was a Vietnam veteran with paid dearly for that service. And so we were married and I served 9 years. Had a child. Our daughter Alicia was born during that period. We moved back to Fort Walton Beach, Florida, where his family was. And I went...
And moved back from where? Where were you?
We were actually at Fort Dix, New Jersey, of all places.
Okay.
So we go to Fort Walton and settle in, and it was blessed because Ed was sick and his family was there. And so we had a child, and it was a lot of support for that. So I started that job search. There's this thing about, well, you were an officer and, therefore you immediately walked into a job. No.
Right.
I worked for an oil company that was going to go into bankruptcy. I worked for a government contractor whose owner was going to go to jail because he was a pathological liar. And I mean that clinically, not colloquially. And so when Ed was sick and I needed a job, I applied for a job with the Air Force as a civilian, temporary clerk typist, GS5.
Wow.
With a master's degree. And I was happy to have the job. Stable environment, good insurance, just a supportive environment. In the meantime, I had been much more fortunate in my reserve unit. I had joined the Army Reserves. I was a captain, senior captain at the time. And I spent the next, 17 years on active duty, going from captain to 1-star. And in the same time, I was working for the Air Force that whole time. They were the perfect employer because they told me right up front, what you do for the Army is more important than what you do for us, and we will always support you. And they always did. I would get deployed. I served all over the country and all over the world, and sometimes with very little notice and a very inconvenience to them, but they would always be there. And that's really unusual. That's a gift and a blessing.
Yeah.
So,
hold on, let's pause because I read something somewhere that you proposed to your husband.
Oh, I did.
You got to tell me this story. And was this at Fort Dix?
Fort McClellan, Alabama.
Oh, that was Fort McClellan. Okay.
So I was first lieutenant. Ed was a captain. We were on the rifle ranges because women had I had never been to the range before. And so we were just beginning that process. And I was doing the annual qualification. And his first sergeant was down in the foxhole with me, and he was kind of, they call it pencil whipping my scores. And so after this day, my the first sergeant who really was close to me, and he told Ed, he said, you need to go ask that lieutenant out. And so we dated about 6 weeks, and I asked him to marry me. And we were married 33 years when he passed away in 2010. Mm-hmm. So, of course, it's always the joke, about being the pushy broad, which is true. But he was very, very gracious about that. So
you go to Fort McClellan, and within how many days or weeks did you know, I want to marry this man?
I didn't date him very long, and at that time I was a young woman, red hair, short skirt, and just. Mm-hmm. But Ed was, like my dad said, the night he met Ed for the first time, the night before we got married, he met Ed for the first time. He said, you've been dating boys and now you found a man. And that's what I knew right away. And he's very kind.
Yeah.
We're both Catholic. I mean, there was a lot of things that were lining up for us. And I got along very well with his family. And my family dearly loved him. And he was just a key part of our lives for just so many years.
He was from Mississippi?
He was Lumberton, Mississippi.
Yeah.
But he was an Air Force brat. His dad had been in the Air Force.
Okay.
So he was raised really all over the world. He had a very sophisticated worldview and had really grown up as much time in England as he had in the States.
And his nickname was Clem, isn't that
Clem.
right?
Edward Clement. And he had been named after his grandmother or grandfather, Clemmy.
Now, what did you call him, though? Did you call him Clem?
Risher.
Risher?
Yeah.
Oh, because, the military part.
Yeah, and everybody, you can always tell who knew him when by what they called him.
Yeah. That poor guy went by Risher,
Ed.
Clem, Ed, Edward was his full name. Maybe his mother called him that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And by the way, we have a daughter named Alicia.
Oh, really?
Same spelling.
Wow.
Alicia, right?
Mm-hmm. Named after her grandmother, or Ed's mom was Alice.
Well, let's see. My grandmother's name was Alice, but did we name her? Yeah, we also did that too.
Yeah.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
All right, so now let's continue on in your career.
So let's go to 9/11. I mean, that was a pivotal day in all of our lives.
And you were just about to retire?
Well, I had, at that time, I was a 1-star. Mm-hmm. I was living in Fort Walton Beach. I was commanding a unit in New York. My headquarters was in downtown New York. And I had 12 units in 10 states. So I was gone all the time. I had people all over the country and a lot of people in Europe. We supported NATO. And when 9/11 happened, that was a sea change.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of people that were first responders in my units, because I was a civil affairs officer, which is that deals with the interface between the military and the civilian world. So you have a very high-ranking organizations with a lot of civilian skills, civilian acquired skills that are then applied when the military needs them on kind of a one-off basis.
Mm-hmm.
So after 9/11, I went back on active duty. I was in Special Operations Command at the time. That unit happened to be one of their subordinate units. So I knew all the senior commanders, and I was already well familiar with most of the people in that mission. And so each of the major four-star commands have a one reserve joint position. And they call them the Chairman's 10. And Special Operations used theirs as their university president.
Okay.
And I applied for that job and was accepted. And I went back. I left my Air Force job. I took a leave without pay and just went back on active duty and served for the next 4 years with SOCOM. It was a really good time for me to be there because, one, they were reorganizing. They had to be a warfighting headquarters because the war was cranking up and their roles were really changing. My organizational psychology background was really relevant.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can take what I know how to do, the strategic planning, the organizational structure, all of that kind of org psychology stuff, and apply it directly. And you're doing it from the inside, not the outside. And so you can be there for the quiet conversations. And so that was a really good time to be there. Their university was a fragile startup and didn't really have, it had really struggled. And so I was able to pull that back together because I'm an experienced commander. By that time, I'd been in command 6 years as a colonel and a general. And so I had the trust of the people. So did you have to prove yourself, that you weren't a social experiment, which was kind of the initial thing, because that was the first woman general officer in Special Operations.
Yeah.
And I'm not a special operator, and they never expected me to be. But one of the generals told me, he said, "Paulette, we thought you were a social experiment. It took us about 2 weeks to figure out, one, you knew what the hell you were doing, and the second is that you had our back."
In what year did they try to stand up the university? Or you said it was new.
It had, let's say, probably 2000-ish.
Okay, so 2 years after is basically when you show up.
Right. And the person who had been in that job before probably wasn't the right person for a startup organization. And so the people that have come into that organization since I was there, they have done terrific work.
And is it fair to say that, let's say it's 98, 99, they have this thought of starting a joint operations university, so then it starts to take shape in 2000. They had whatever vision for it, and then 9/11 happens. The vision changes, or the goals or the objectives change, so therefore you're not only taking over for a thing that's new, but perhaps it's also because of 9/11, it's even more new because of the circumstance. New requirements.
A new sense of urgency of why it's important. I think it was originally, and what my husband would have sarcastically called a GOBI.
Okay.
That's a general officer bright idea. Somebody thought it was a good idea. Whereas when they first implemented it, it was kind of done on a shoestring and without a lot of command emphasis. And it took somebody from the outside with the right skill set to build the coalitions necessary to have it integrated into the command. And then while I was the university president, we also reorganized all of the special operations headquarters. And I took over a center, one of their big organizations that was responsible for futures, requirements, education, training, wargaming, exercises. And it's where my Air Force civilian acquisition background and my psychology background and my special ops background all kind of came together. So I did that dual-hatted for 3 years. And then at some point in time, I had to go back and reclaim my civil service, or I was going to lose my retirement. And with my retirement came my Blue Cross Blue Shield, and I wasn't going to do that.
Yeah.
So I was promoted to 2-star and became the reserve deputy for Special Operations Command.
Okay.
And retired from both jobs. Eventually, about a year later, retired. It was just got to be too much. By that time, we're in D.C.
Yeah.
And we had been there, and I had gone to work for Booz Allen.
Yeah.
And it's really a good experience in so many ways. And we had been there in D.C. about 3 or 4 months, and I got a call one afternoon, and this man said, Paulette, we're going to open an organization and strategy team in Huntsville. Would you and Ed be willing to go? And I said, well, I need 10 minutes.
Wait, now what year was this? Remind me.
2006.
Okay.
And so I said, well, give me 10 minutes. And they said, oh, this is an important life decision. Take as long as you want. I said, this is not a hard decision.
Yeah.
So I called my husband and I said, do you want to go to Huntsville? And he said, yes. And then we had the 30-minute discussion of where we were going for dinner. It was like,
yeah.
But we were, we had lived in Fort Walton at that time. My daughter and my 3 grandkiddos were there. And we had always come up here to camp and to ride our motorcycles.
Okay.
So this was our playground, and there was no question about coming here.
Yeah.
And I always, when we moved very quickly and came back to Alabama, and I called Ed and on my way home because he was closing out of Virginia, and I was going to close on our house here. And I told him, I said, if anyone had ever told me all those years ago that I'd come back to Alabama singing Sweet Home Alabama and actually mean it, I would, God has a sense of humor.
We've lived here 6 months, and I kid you not, I told Wendy this one. I had to go back and forth for a few weeks to close out my old job before starting my new role down here. And we are about to touch down in Huntsville. And just on my I don't want to say iPod, that would date me, right?
Yeah,
my Apple Music, my playlist. On my playlist, Sweet Home Alabama comes on, and then the wheels touch down. I'm like, you know what? That's like divine intervention.
It is.
Just another testament. You need to live here. Did you live in Herndon by chance?
Yeah, we did.
Yeah, I know where you live. I grew up in Herndon.
Did you?
So here's all these things coming together, right? In this
small
interview.
world.
But I lived on the north side. I think you were over by the airport.
Right, we were.
Probably near corporate, Booz Allen corporate.
Right, and then we lived in a very nice little townhome, and
Yeah.
it was fun because all of our neighbors were Indian.
Oh, wow.
And they couldn't understand why Ed stayed home and I went to work because that wasn't the norm. And the little Indian kids, one day when this little kid comes up on his bicycle and knocks on the door and asks Ed if he can come out and play.
Did he go do it?
Yeah, of course.
Would they play cricket?
I have no idea.
It'd be kind of fun to learn a new game. Right?
Yeah.
I'd love for someone to knock on the door. You want to come learn cricket? Yeah, I would actually. And he had retired by then.
He actually he had left the military and
Okay.
he was not well.
Got it.
So I was kind of the breadwinner, and I think of all of the strengths that he had no ego with that. We just didn't care where the money, as long as the family is taken care of, we don't care where the money is. Because I could have never done what I did if he had not been willing to take care of the home front.
Yeah.
Our daughter was not well. My parents were sick. He had his sick parents. I mean,
Jeez.
He just did the family side of things. And, when I'm getting no notice mobilizations and I'll take off and be gone for 6 months,
Right.
you have to have a real man to take over that and
Sure.
to keep that going.
So let's go back a little bit around 9/11. So at that point, you had thought about, what's kind of next? I'm going to retire. What am I going to do? Then 9/11 happens, and you are infused. I just want to make sure you're kind of infused with a new purpose, right? A new level of patriotism. Do you think that extended or planted, a different level of seed in you to kind of keep giving back and keep working and keep going?
I think that actually that changes a little bit earlier. I think at one point in time, you realize in your life, for example, I was a colonel. I was an Army War College graduate.
Mm-hmm.
I was an Air War College graduate. I mean, I was well qualified in this. And at some point in time, I recognized that I perhaps could be a general officer. And that opening that lens brings with it a whole series of actions that you need to take.
Mm-hmm.
There's developmental assignments. There's things you have to do if you're serious about it. If you're not just talking, but you are serious, then you need to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was the turning point for me, is that for one thing I had to do was leave my command where I had grown up in Pensacola and where I was very comfortable, and take a colonel command in another organization, another part of the Army. And that was a smart move, and Ed was supportive of that, even though there were a lot of sacrifices with that.
Mm-hmm.
But once the idea of going back on active duty, I think, was almost the doors of opportunity opening. I saw the need. I already had the relationships. I had the support of the people that were in the decision making. And so it was the logical next step. I don't know that it was, would I have stayed as long if we hadn't been reorganizing and SOCOM being so different?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not. I wouldn't have probably found that need to use my skills.
Yeah. I got my undergrad in management information systems, and then I got an MBA later. But I'll tell my kids all the time, one of my favorite courses, you have to take certain things along the way, sociology, mm-hmm. History and things like that are part of your core. But psychology was always something that I felt like suited me so well as a manager of people along the way, and just trying to understand. Can you talk me through a little bit about that and specifically how that has helped you in certain positions that you've had in certain experiences?
I think that's a really good question. And one of the things, because I'm an organizational psychologist as opposed to a clinician, I am fascinated by how organizations work mm-hmm. and how decisions are made. It's kind of a mix of psychology and command. I understand the human dynamics of leading an organization and what stands in the way of that too. So, you get that kind of practical experience. But I like models, and I have a number of tools that I've used. Even when I was a commander, I would use my psychology tools in command. Mm-hmm. We'd do exercises, we'd do surveys, we'd do all of these things that were not the typical military answer, but I brought them from my psychology world. But the other side is when I'm in a consultant role with an organization, particularly a Department of Defense organization, mm-hmm. when I speak the language and I understand their stresses and what the dynamics of that work is, and I can talk about the values and pull that together. So the blending of the psychology and the military together, at least in the world that I've grown up in, has been a really powerful symbiotic relationship. And it still is. Those are two factors that affect how I operate today.
Can you think of a time and share with us if you ever had an employee, I'm just going to call it an employee, right? Someone under that was reported to you where you truly used your training or, and the knowledge you have in the psychology field to kind of turn that relationship around, whatever it was, whether it was between you, friction between you and that person, or just on the developmental side for that person?
I don't know that something jumps to my mind on that. The one of the things that being a commander, I think, it has an impact, is that I have a pretty simple approach to leading people. Mm-hmm. When you have an employee who's struggling, and whether that's interpersonal or that's technical or capability is struggling, I always ask myself the question: unwilling or unable?
Right.
Is the person unable to do the job? And then your options can you coach, train, mentor? Can you job share, job shift, job content tweak mm-hmm. so that they can be successful in that? Or do you need to help them find the next job in a good way? Mm-hmm. I mean, you can do that without being coercive. That's the unable. The unwilling, there's where my commander side of me comes in. So, and I usually lay out the parameters of what the expectation is, what's negotiable and what's not. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an important thing to do. And I give them a choice. join my team or leave.
Yeah.
If you leave in 30 days, I'll support you out the door and love you.
Right.
31 days, I'm going after you.
Yeah.
So, and it's a little bit of that, and I guess the commander comes through pretty strong in that, but that's kind of the way I feel.
Are you the type of person, this is the way I am, where I don't know how many times I had to go work as a contractor, right? I'm working for a government manager, chief, and you have someone who tells you, oh, you got to be careful, or they're going to do this or do that. I would just dismiss that. Let me have my own experience with this person, right?
That is so good.
I hear you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your opinion, but I will have my own experience. Similarly, with that tough employee, oh, you can't, they're lazy, they're X, Y, and Z. You're not going to be able to get along with them. Okay. But I'm now the manager, right? And we'll see how this goes. Let me have my own experience with them.
That's really wise. That's really a good approach.
And it's interesting you said toolkit. I remember being in school, and a professor would always put me at ease. Let's say it's like economics, and you're kind of nervous, like, oh man, this is going to be. You start looking at the syllabus, and you start looking at the textbook, and they would be like, listen, there's a lot of stuff, right? There's a lot of stuff in these books. I'm just going to give you a toolkit. Mm-hmm. And I only expect you to really take away 5, 6, 7 things from this course, right? That will help you no matter what. And those are the things you're actually going to retain, or could it be finance? Can you understand the future value of money and the net present value of money? Well, then you're more than halfway there.
Right.
Everything else is kind of an appendage to that. And I don't know. I think about the same thing with just approach, right? And it doesn't matter. It's like the advice your father gave you. Hey, you're smart. You figure it out. Whether you're the CEO of still serving veterans, or you're a major general over a command, or you're in your consultant practice, you're going to go in with a certain toolkit, right? Certain principles that are tried and true, some psychology, background as well to be successful, or to at least understand, kind of the situation.
Right. And I think that's really a good approach. It is have your own experience, because so many times, it's the story you're telling yourself. It's not what's going on.
Right.
And as I'm getting older, I realize that more and more of how much of our lives are eaten up by the story.
Sure. I'll tell you one cool example, if you don't mind.
Sure.
There was I was running this project. This was a global server recap type thing at all of this particular customers' locations around the world. And there was a lot of stakeholders, lots of locations, a lot of elements to this. But there was this one gentleman that sometimes these things happen where there's kind of that bottleneck that's created by that one person that's been doing that one job forever and has power go to their head, and they're inflexible or whatever. And everyone told you can't deal with this guy. You can't deal with this guy. You can't deal with this guy. And I was just determined. I am going to be that person that turns this around. And he sends an email one day, and I was glad he sent me this email, because at the bottom there was a how some people will have a quote, Abraham Lincoln said this, or whatever's important to them. They'll kind of put it as this little PS footnote. That sometimes in the workplace, not everybody does that, but if it means something to them, then they do. And this guy had put something in awareness to, like, it was a rare form of cancer. I looked it up, and I thought to myself, this guy's hurting.
Wow.
Somebody has, you put that there on purpose. Everyone's going to see this quote, right? And they're going to not judge you, right? But everyone's going to have an opinion one way or the other. Or maybe it invites, further conversation. But I thought, wow. So I hit him with, I hit him up, and I asked him about it. And it turns out his sister had passed, and, something that was very troubling, and that just changed everything.
So I'm gonna reinterpret what you just said.
Sure.
He put that out there so people notice, and nobody noticed.
Right.
They didn't get past the noise. They didn't get past that. How it is, you're buried in your email and you don't even read the quote at the bottom. It's just words. The fact that you noticed set you apart in that. Noticed and had the moral courage and care enough to ask the question.
Yeah.
But I think so much people say things, especially now with just this overindulgence in media and all. You just let it slide by.
Yeah. Do you read the room? Are you good at that? Like now that I've met you and I've learned more in doing research for this episode, I'm like, oh no, she's been reading me since the first time I met her. I didn't know she was this psychology whiz, and she's got me profiled.
Absolutely not. One of the things I've gotten better about, because it's become a reoccurring interest of mine, is how our brains impact how we deal with the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not an expert and I'm not a clinician, but I spend a lot of time reading, researching, and talking to people about how our brains work. And I've gotten much more sensitive about reading a room of what part of our brain is acting in that discussion.
Mm.
And the biggest thing is that 90% of our thinking is unconscious. It is outside of our conscious awareness. Our emotions, our seat of our values, our seat of our fight, flight, and freeze response,
Mm-hmm.
and how many times people are just on alert. And I'm getting better at reading that and trying to diffuse situations so that people can hear what's being said. Because a lot of times when your body's all wound up, your higher order reasoning power is offline.
Mm-hmm.
And it impacts decision making. It allows people, we get lost in noise instead of whatever the focus is. And so that's one of the things I'm working on really right now is how do you help people come back to center, recognize that they've been hijacked, and begin to focus on the things that are important. And it's a rich field. There's a lot of just the research right now enabled by technology is just super. But that's probably where I'm getting better at, is to read the body language of fight, flight, or freeze, or are you listening and paying attention?
So let's talk about still serving veterans now. You have been, I think you've been with the organization since 2014, is that right?
And actually, before then, I was on the board of directors.
Okay.
So I have 2 years on the board, and in 2014, we went after a major grant from the Call of Duty Endowment, and that is the Activision Blizzard video game company that had underwritten this endowment focused on veteran employment. As of May of this year, they have helped 100,000 veterans find jobs.
Wow.
They are superb supporters and have supported us since 2014. They're also serious business people. And we knew at the time that they were, that if we won that award, that grant, it was going to take a full-time program manager.
Sure.
And I had been working for DigiFlight, one of my favorite companies, and had been doing that for 3 years. And I was a proposal manager. You shoot me. You know, but
what's our P-win?
Yeah,
what's our P-win on this, Risher?
Yeah. And I'm going to go to my red team, pink team, green team.
Right.
Yeah. But I was so I wrote the grant request, which is a proposal by any other wings.
Sure.
And when we won it, then I left DigiFlight and went to work for Still Serving Veterans full time as the programs officer.
Gotcha.
I did that for 5 years. And then when Will Webb, our founder or co-founder, retired in summer of 19, I became the CEO and have done that since.
So I met you. Let's give a little context here, right? On how did Paulette end up being on episode 17 of the Our Town podcast? I worked for Mantech. One of the first things I did when I came to town was look for some big thing to sponsor. Through the Trash Pandas, I saw, June 12th is going to be a game. There was going to be 3 games on their schedule that were all about honoring veterans. Mm-hmm. And I wanted the first one of the 3. So we locked in support of that. And you start looking at the things that you can do. And one of them was, a pregame ceremony. And, if you have a charity in mind, that's your opportunity to be on the field and present a check. And so then the next thing was, veterans are important to Mantech. Mm-hmm. There's all kinds of cyber schools we could donate to. We could probably donate to the Parks and Rec, but Mantech is huge on veteran employment. Mm-hmm. And of course it was a game to honor veterans. And so I just reached out, kind of cold called. I think I sent you an email, pulled up your website, sent it to Debbie Joyner, I think to you, a couple other people, and then met you and kind of discussed what is Mantech doing in the community, and got a little bit of your story, and then of course that's led to having you on the program, and just being over there. You have a nice facility right there in the downtown area, kind of a 2-level. You come up the stairs. It looks like every time I go there, there's someone waiting to come in and receive services. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about those people that you serve, the veterans that come in on a daily basis and interact with you and your staff.
At any given time, we are supporting about 2,000 veterans, about 1,000 with employment, job search. And this is one of the side effects of COVID. When COVID broke out the first time, we had about 14 or 15% of our clients were outside of our Alabama and Georgia area. Now that number is 55%. We are helping people all over the country, and our mantra is kind of wherever they're living or would like to live, we can help them with their job search. Mm-hmm. The ability to do that was reflected in because we've invested in the technology. We use that Call of Duty endowment money to build an infrastructure and operate as a business. Mm-hmm. We also have about 1,000 people that we're helping with their VA benefits, and those folks are located here in the northern part of Alabama. The typical person who comes in for VA benefits is either young or just getting out of the service or recent, or much older. We have a large percentage of Vietnam veterans coming in. They're a very vulnerable population. Older, sicker. Agent Orange is a real deal. Mm. And
so your average Vietnam vet's about 75 years old?
Yeah, 65, 70-ish, because somebody that's my peer or older. Okay. And many of them have really struggled with the health issues of Agent Orange. Mm-hmm. And many of them, they did not come back to a grateful nation.
Yeah.
They came back to being abused and not being able to wear the uniform, being spat upon, and just a really horrible time. And many of them had never filed a claim. And they won't do it for themselves, but they will for mama. And that's our story. And so we also end up dealing with a lot of people at end of life that need aid and attendance or special benefits for their family member. And that's a very poignant and specialized area. We also in the employment area we are roughly evenly divided between people just transitioning from the military. Mm-hmm. And which has its unique set of challenges. And we've gotten very good at brokering that. And were accepted as a Department of Labor employment partner, and which is a big deal because that will allow Department of Labor located on representatives from all over the country to send people to us for help. Mm-hmm. And so that was a big deal. And the other group that we help are veterans in crisis, people that are food shortages, need help with their rent. The stories, I mean, you just would not believe.
Sure.
And we're seeing an increase in this. Affordable housing is just really short supply, and we'll try to get somebody off the street for a night until we can find them a place to live. And we in Huntsville, the homeless business is booming here. Yeah. And there's even been comments about other communities bringing their homeless population to Huntsville because we have so many more resources.
Wow.
Which is really a sad set of commentary.
Yeah. So is there a difference? So is it? I think you touched on this a little bit, but pride keeps people from reaching out and wanting help. Is that true? They're just too proud and
I think it's more ignorance than pride.
Okay.
Now, the person who, if you're hungry, you don't care where that check comes from. But I think that a lot of times people just don't know that there's help available.
Right.
They either with their VA benefits or their employment help. And that's where our partnerships with different organizations, we have we're partners with other agencies and other organizations across the state and across the country that send us people. Here, go talk to still serving veterans.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to ask, how much of a challenge is it it's kind of the marketing and the promotion side of how does that message get to that person that there are resources, and not only are there resources, but they're in their neighborhood. And when you're in Huntsville, it's not that far away.
Right. I think we have a coalition or collaboration with relationships with service providers across the 13 counties of North Alabama.
Okay.
We've created a thing called the North Alabama Veteran Resource Network, Navarnet, which is just basically a group of people who agree to share information and cross-refer. There are 80,000 veterans in our 13 northern counties. About 45% of them are elderly, and many of them are rural, and many of them are isolated. And they don't know that the First Baptist Church offers a food pantry every second Saturday.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is be the broker of information. If you have a veteran in need, call us, and we'll see if we can identify the resources for them.
Yeah.
And because part of our mission is not just to provide direct services that help veterans build meaningful lives, but to be a leader and a collaborator in the community and in our state.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a moral responsibility. We have the resources, we have the ability, we have the relationships. Well, then leverage them for the good purposes.
Yeah. And this may be kind of a dumb question, but I'm assuming that your time in the military, your position in the military, has greatly helped still serving veterans. Not that they never would hire someone that didn't have military background to understand right what these soldiers have gone through, but certainly is a kind of a lesson learned. Like, okay, for this formula to work, we need someone of Paulette's stature, background, experience to really build a successful organization.
I have a lot. I'm kind of standing on the shoulders of Will Webb, who was the first CEO. Will was a very well-respected Army colonel, West Point graduate, came from a long family. I actually worked for his father, Major General Webb, when I was a young captain in Germany. So I didn't realize that until many years later. It's one of those small world stories. But Will was able to build the organization. That is not my skill set. I could not have done what he did.
Okay.
But to take that organization and to grow it and to do what's next and expand our influence, that I can do.
Yeah.
It's that blend of, certainly the rank doesn't hurt, but it's more about it's about personal connections and being involved and willing to engage with the state. And I think we may or may not get to this, so I want to introduce it. I'm very active in the veteran suicide prevention efforts of the state.
Yep.
We call it the Alabama's Challenge. And it's really the creation of two different entities. The state legislature a couple of years ago created a task force on veteran suicide prevention and asked me to chair it. And later, Alabama was joined to other states in what they call the Governor's Challenge, which is a national program and really well done, just super well done. And we went back to the legislature and asked them to combine those two. So we have the Alabama's Challenge, and it's helping people. I mean, it's helping veteran suicide's a real deal.
Yeah.
Madison County has the highest number of veteran suicides in 2020 of any county in the state.
Really?
And the sad thing, Troy, is that the highest rate of suicide is among young veterans. And we lose nationally about 17 a day. That 22 a day is something that's an older number. We've made progress, but still 17. Highest rate among young veterans. The highest numbers, hands down, are among older veterans.
Yeah.
It's back to this Vietnam veterans that are older, sicker, isolated, socially isolated. And they are incredibly at risk. And so the fact that the state is investing, Admiral Kent Davis, who is our commissioner of VA for the state, and I co-chair the task force. And it's hard work,
yeah.
But at least the state is investing in it.
it's like the big elephant in the room, right? To talk about suicide. And let me try to ask this question based on what we've talked about. Where is it more common for those that have no idea that there's resources available to them? Is that the highest percentage of the suicide rate? Then is there a portion that are aware they may have contacted a group like Still Serving Veterans for help, and then still decide, to take their life? Does that make sense?
I think
how knowledgeable are they of those that commit suicide that there is help?
When one of the criteria for suicidal ideation is the belief that there is no hope.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not about an agency or about a 1-800 number. It's burdensomeness. People would be better off without me.
They won't understand me.
And they're better off without me. And there is social isolation, I think, is one of the number one that people feel that nobody cares. There also is that level of pain that doesn't give you a chance to realize that there is respite from that.
Mm-hmm.
There is treatment, there is hope, but unless you happen to be in, and get to a point where somebody reaches out to you and says, I'm concerned about you. Are you thinking of hurting yourself?
Mm-hmm.
And ask the damn question. Many people come to me. That's the one I hear most often. I'm afraid to ask because I'm afraid that'll trigger a suicide. It will not. Ask the question. Are you considering hurting yourself? And if they are, so validate their opinion. This is not the time to pat them on the head or pat them on the hand and say, well, everything's going to be okay, or, that's not. Their view is their view, and it's their experience. You mentioned the term earlier. It's their experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then expedite treatment. And, the 1-800 number on veteran suicide, and this summer they're coming up with a 988 number, and that will be for mental health issues. Press 1 for veteran, whether you're a veteran or trying to help a veteran, and that puts you into the VA system. Is it perfect? No. Are there issues? Absolutely. It's a limited resource, but there is hope, and we're beginning to make progress.
Yeah, and I'm assuming you have seen that progress, right, from the moment of, well, even before it's created as an Alabama challenge, mm-hmm. right? Just the thought and the thinking and the meetings and the conversations about it.
Interesting that you say that. One of the things about this governor's challenge, right now I think it's 37 states belong to this, and mm-hmm. it's been growing over years. It's a national level effort, very sophisticated. I've never seen more collaboration between state entities and agencies. If you have a question or want to think about trying a program, somebody's done it. And they'll give you everything. Here's what we learned.
Yeah.
There's no sense of territoriality or not invented here. It's the most refreshing thing. And if you have a veteran that's in trouble, we had a client that was down in Florida in a remote area. I had no idea who to call. I called the commissioner of VA for the state of Florida. And his public affairs officer, who was an Army or an Air Force veteran, said to me, he says, here's the name of the person you need to call. And he sent him an email. And when I got the guy on the phone, he and I had been in a working group together. And his name came right up on my email and stuff. And I thought, what's the chances of that happening?
Yeah. Isn't it amazing?
It is amazing. It's where technology is using for the good.
Yeah. That's always just, I don't know another word to put it. Amazing when other people come back in your life and you had different experiences before. And that's always a good thing, not to burn bridges with people, right? Or have some sort of ill feelings, because you never know.
There's a special operations mantra that says, don't burn a bridge that you may have to walk across.
I want to get to the pick six.
Okay.
And that is basically, I have two games I play on this podcast. One's the quick six. I've been doing that longest, and that's just 6 questions. And I could probably make up 6 in my mind real quick, like window or aisle.
Oh, aisle.
Aisle. Okay, right. I
A
did
control freak. I'm not going to sit next to a window.
But what I did is, I understand you have a hobby or interest in photography and specifically landscapes. Okay, so we're going to switch over to the internet,
Okay.
which basically means to another computer that now I will bring up 6 pictures,
Okay.
and I want you to look at them and just you don't necessarily have to give me a one-word answer, but that would be kind of cool. Maybe if you can come up with a one-word answer for that as you see it. And then maybe a little bit of commentary on as you look at I think there's 3 paintings and 3 photos.
Okay.
All right.
And I'm not an expert at this.
Oh,
so
good.
I'm an amateur.
Well, good. Well, aren't we all?
Yeah.
Pretty much. That's something else maybe we'll get to, but aren't we all amateurs just at different levels, right? All right. Let me switch over.
Okay.
Okay, that's not it. That's the notes. Here, by the way, here's the Still Serving Veterans website, and maybe after we do the pick 6, we'll come back to this.
Okay.
Okay, because I think that's important. Okay, picture number 1. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Ooh, pretty.
Pretty's a good one. Now you can't
I
say
can't
pretty.
say pretty,
6
yeah.
times. So
No,
you
okay.
used up pretty, but
So, you know what? What came to me first was the Lamar Valley in Yellowstone Park, which is a beautiful area of Yellowstone where the rocks that you're seeing are actually glacier.
wow,
So I don't know where that was taken, but that's a lovely painting.
kind of like a mountain meadow. Is that what we're seeing there?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Picture number 2.
Oh, pretty again.
It's a little bit different style, and again, I'm not an expert, right? But the brush strokes are different apparently. But
Isn't it interesting how the birds are flying there in that white space?
mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Okay. Picture number 3.
Historical, European.
Maybe 1800s.
Yeah, very different.
My wife and I, my joke is always, what, 9? Was it that we'll watch these shows, and someone will say like, "Yeah, what period is that from?" And it seemingly it was always what was it? The turn of the century, like the 19th turn of the century. Like, don't they say that all the time? It's like everything on the show is turn of the century. All right, here we go. Next one.
Oh, beautiful. What I noticed about this one is the technology there is an S curve that draws your eyes into that picture.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely beautifully done.
I wish I could paint. And I don't know that, and playing a musical instrument, I don't think are ever going to be something I can do.
My mother painted, and many of the paintings in my home are hers. She wasn't, she had really good sense of color.
Yeah.
So painting is definitely not mine, much more photography.
I wish I had your father's confidence to be like, "Oh, you're a smart guy. You'll figure it out." Like, I don't know if I can figure out playing the guitar or the piano or painting a landscape.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you ready? Next one.
Oh,
Now, this is a photo.
yeah. Some of the things I like about this photo, one is you notice that the horizon line is very straight.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of those things that you do. It's got a lot of nice curves in it that draws your eye into the photo. And that road that's right in the middle of it is an interesting, it's really cool.
By the way, for those who have seen several episodes of the Our Town podcast, I thank you. But in prior episodes, the guest was always looking over to the left, and Paulette could do that. But the lights, the studio lights, I think I noticed in episode 8, it was blinding Chad Emerson. And luckily, we have a different monitor that's just to the right. So I provide 2 options for the guest, but they all seem to want to take the one to the right, taking the easy road. I get it.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, last one. I believe this is the last one. Yep.
Oh, I love it. Isn't that interesting? The slowing the water down so you can see it, how it really falls. Again, drawing your eye into the image.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
By the way, have you heard of High Falls?
Mm-mm.
We just went to High Falls, which is you get past Scottsboro, and then you go over the Tennessee River, and then you kind of double back, and we went on a million country roads. And it reminds me of this, just a natural bridge. I know Virginia has a natural bridge from being there, but there's a natural bridge. There's this waterfall, and it was easier when I was younger, but we were jumping off 10, 15-foot rocks into this 15, 20-foot deep. It was awesome.
It's beautiful. Wow.
If anyone in your family, extended family, ever wants to do some thrills and wants to do a little rock, like some free climbing and rock jumping, High Falls.
High Falls.
It's about 90 minutes from here.
Be fun to go on a photo journey there.
I think that's it. That concludes the pick six. What'd you think?
Interesting. Yeah, as I'm not much of a painter, I can just admire what other people do.
Yeah.
But it was fun to watch my mother. One of the things that she was fearless about was she picked up painting at age 60 and painted until well into her 80s. And she was always, people would be painting on some little thing about, 3x3, and mother would have a 3-by-foot, canvas. And so
yeah,
I enjoy my home where I walk through it and see the things that she had created. And works of art, no, but just a real story behind them.
So did you pick up this interest from her, or?
The painting part of it isn't as much me. The photography, which is the kind of the blend of the technology. I like pretty lenses.
Yeah.
And nice equipment. And Ed gave me a nice camera a couple of years ago, and I have kind of upgraded it a lot. And I enjoy, and as a matter of fact, I watch a lot of videos and educational programs on it. For me, it's entertaining. I don't watch much TV. So to be able to sit in there and watch somebody who's really good at training and teaching you, and I'm a nerd, so I enjoy the Photoshop and the processing. I'm pretty good at that, so it's fun.
All right, as promised, let's go back to these still serving veterans. I believe I can bring that up.
Yeah, and our new website's coming up in 2 weeks.
It is?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
So what's going to be different about it compared to what we're looking at now, your current website?
This current one we've had since 2014, and so it's kind of evolved over time. And we've upgraded the, underneath this is actually a Squarespace website, and they've gone through a major renovation or upgrade, and we're now following along with it. But this basically shows our service offerings. One of the things that I'm proud of, and if you go down to the very bottom,
here,
further down,
okay,
see one up, a little bit up,
right there.
Okay, yeah. You see those list of awards and a little tokens like the Call of Duty Endowment.
Yeah.
They only fund 10 nonprofits in the United States. So to be a primary grantee of theirs is a big deal. The Candid, which is a Charity Navigator, I just lost the name of it. They've just changed their name. We have a platinum seal of transparency, which only 0.5% of the nonprofits in the United States have.
Really?
And there are 45,000 nonprofits that claim veteran services. So what that basically means is that we manage our money very well, and we're very transparent in how we do that. Charity Navigator on 100, top-rated nonprofits 100, a gold seal, and we just were awarded the platinum seal from the Department of Labor for hiring veterans. So those are things that, I don't know, they make a difference, and they show your connection to the community.
I always, I hate to hear or be asked these types of questions, like, where do you see still serving veterans in 3 to 5 years? But, you've been CEO for, you said 3-4 years? Mm-hmm. What do you want the next 3 to 4 years to look like?
I think I have a couple of guiding principles. One is we have traditionally built our services around the needs of the veterans, which are evolving. And we've just been accepted by Auburn University to be part of an MBA study program. We were previously participating in the program in 2016, I think. And I've asked them to look at, and we, the board, have asked them to look at what is the evolving needs of veterans. Where do we think veterans will be in 5 to 7 years? Mm-hmm. What are the demographics? And the world situation changes. What is going to be the need? The second piece of this is stable funding. Nonprofit funding is always a challenge. All grants end, just like all contracts end.
Yep.
And so you need stability there, and you need to have a broad enough framework of funding, and then the good stewardship to make sure you're using it wisely. And then the third piece of this is, among these 45,000 veteran service organizations, which run all the way from big national, multi-million-dollar, really big deals, to mom and pops. Where do we fit? There's a mosaic of those, and where do we fit in that? I think that will help us figure out where to go next. On the immediate need is looking to directly support Fort Campbell, Kentucky. We've got some ongoing connection with them and some collaboration with them. Fort Benning, Georgia is clearly a target for us always because we have an office right outside their gate.
Mm-hmm.
But being able to provide transition services. The other group that I'm really concerned about, and especially in employment, are veterans who are being forced out of the service for medical reasons. They're being either boarded or medically retired.
Right.
These men and women are not leaving because they wanted to, for the most part. They don't know what their timeline is. Their whole job search is screwed up because they don't know when they've got to go for doctor's appointments. And it can be 90 days and it can be 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
And they have special needs because many of them feel used and abused. And to be able to support them during that time of struggle and help them land well in a job, I think is a unique service offering.
Yeah.
So those are kind of some of the things that I think we will be an evolution of where we are now. But a smart one. Don't build something you can't sustain.
Yeah. You said the office near Fort Benning. Is that over in Phoenix City?
It is in Phoenix City. It's right on Broad Street, literally across the river from Columbus.
Do they go by Eastern or Central Time? Because I hear that they just do whatever they want.
No, they go by Eastern Time.
Okay.
So, when I go over to my office, even though it's in Alabama, it's on Eastern Time Zone. And so we're constantly, and over the years, we've had that office there for 8 years. So we've adapted to that, but I always have to put the time zone in there and when I go to speak or run a workshop or something over there, because my Apple Watch doesn't change until I go across the river.
Right.
And so I have to
You're
be
late.
really careful. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you have to be really careful.
It's like the people who come and commute down to the Arsenal from like Chattanooga, which is Eastern Time, right? And it could be something as simple as, hey, just meet me at Panera for breakfast. And they have to remember, okay, I went to bed in Eastern Time and I need to be in Huntsville at Central Time. It's only 1 hour, but man, it'll mess with you.
It does. Yeah.
I want to refer you to another podcast. You're going to be a guest on the Patriot to the Core podcast. If you'd like to learn more about that, that's my episode 5 with Thad Forrester. His brother Mark was killed in action in Afghanistan in September 29th, 2010.
Wow.
And your story, even your husband was in Vietnam veteran. You're starting your career at a time which was not where women were not in the military. There were no opportunities to go to a service academy until 1975, right? Or 1976. So that graduating class of 1980 were the first women. Yeah,
they were studettes. I mean, they get a great deal of credit in my mind.
I enjoy doing research on guests. I love learning about people, and people will come on this program and think, there's nothing interesting about me. Everything is interesting about everybody. And your story, and the more I'm just amazed, right? And I don't know you that well, but just in what I have read and what you've told today, what an amazing life.
A blessed life. I'm so fortunate.
An amazing family. Sounds like your husband, even though he was sick, was an amazing man. Your father, your mother, a true American. And I know Thad will be anxious, and hopefully you'll want to continue, and he'll ask you a different set of questions. But you are a true patriot.
Well, thank you so much.
And thank you for your service.
I appreciate it.
And I look forward to all that we do and continue doing in this community in Huntsville.
It's absolutely wonderful to be here. Thank you.
You know, soccer's coming. The MLS has another league, apparently in Huntsville, at the recently, I think it's the Joe Davis Stadium.
Yeah.
It's going to be, is either in process or it's going to be redone. have 6,000 seats, and it's the MLS Next Pro. It's like their series. So similar to, in baseball I think it's a little different because it is the Los Angeles Angels, and at any point one of their players can just get called up, either to AAA or right to the majors. And some of these other leagues, kind of like our Huntsville Havoc, is a separate professional league. I'm not exactly sure what their path is to like the NHL, but it's really cool. It's professional soccer, and I'm not a huge soccer fan, but I am a sports fan. And all of us in Huntsville, I think, that come from everywhere else in the country, we like sports. So now,
that's so funny. I am not a sports fan, and when my whole team laughs because I'll use a sports metaphor, and everybody in the room stops, look around. So she just
did she say that? Or even the Orion, right? Now we have live music and we have some serious performers coming here.
What a beautiful facility! What a great idea! And that is our city taking what was an old rundown mall.
Yep.
And instead of that becoming trash, just to make it the center of our community, it's terrific. I love that area.
My wife and I are excited about Broadway coming.
Yeah.
We can't wait to go to the shows. Paulette, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it, Troy.
All the best to you and your organization, and we'll see you around town.
All right.
All right. Have a good one.
Thank you.